They tried to lock me away like a secret, like I was a burden to hide. My own daughter, the one I once rocked to sleep, planned to put me behind sterile walls where no one would hear my cries. The woman who taught her to walk wanted to steal my freedom. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning for the last 6 months, I woke up to silence thick with neglect, in my tiny apartment in Queens where the hum of city life felt miles away. The smell of stale coffee mingled with forgotten dreams in my cluttered kitchen. My excavated memories spilled across photo albums scattered on my small dining table. There was my late husband's fishing hat hanging on the coat rack by the door. Faded snapshots of my children's birthdays were tucked between the pages of old recipe books. My nursing certificates hung neatly framed on the living room wall, but they were gathering dust like everything else in my life. Those certificates represented 37 years of my life. 37 years of saving lives, wiping tears, holding hands in hospital corridors. I had built a small fortune by investing my nursing salary in stocks over the decades. My portfolio had grown steadily, and I even had some money in Bitcoin that my late husband had convinced me to buy years ago when nobody understood what it was. Our wealth in dollars seemed comfortable for my retirement, but I never flaunted it. I lived simply. I saved wisely. I thought I was securing my future, not knowing my own family would try to steal it from me. That Thursday was supposed to be special. My daughter Sarah had promised we would have lunch at Katz's Delicatessen, just the two of us, like old times. I had put on my best blue dress, the one with tiny flowers that my husband always said brought out my eyes. I had waited by the window, watching the street, my purse clutched in my arthritic hands. The phone sat silent on the kitchen counter. Minutes ticked by. Then an hour. Then 2. The betrayed silence was louder than the city sirens outside my window. I called her 3 times. Each ring echoed like a slap. No answer. Just the cold mechanical voice telling me to leave a message. What message do you leave when your heart is breaking? What words do you use when your own child has forgotten you exist? I sat in that blue dress until the sun began to set, painting my small apartment in shades of orange and gold that felt like mockery. The dress wrinkled around me as I finally stood, my knees protesting after hours of waiting. I made myself a cup of tea with hands that trembled not from age, but from the weight of understanding. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was choice. I remember the years I poured into that family, juggling 2 jobs and late-night nursing shifts to keep a roof over our heads in this unforgiving city. After my husband died 7 years ago, I became everything to everyone. The bank account. The babysitter. The emotional dumping ground. The solution to every problem they didn't want to solve themselves. Mom, can you lend me some money? The rent's due, Sarah would say, her voice full of casual expectation. I said yes. Again. And again. 500 here, 1,000 there. Sometimes 2,000 when her husband lost another job. I never asked when they would pay me back because asking felt selfish. Love shouldn't come with receipts, I told myself. But maybe it should come with respect. My forgiveness was endless, even when their promises evaporated like steam from my morning tea. I'll call you back, Mom. We'll visit this weekend, Mom. Thanks for understanding, Mom. Understanding became my middle name. Understanding that I would always come last. Understanding that my needs would always wait. Understanding that my love was infinite, but theirs had conditions. The cold silences replaced the warmth we once shared. Phone calls became transactions. Visits became favors they granted me. My grandchildren grew up seeing me as the woman who gave them money for birthdays and Christmas, not as the grandmother who had once taught them to tie their shoes and bake cookies shaped like stars. The subtle manipulations cut deeper than open wounds. Guilt trips disguised as concern. You should understand, Mom, we're doing what's best for you. You can't take care of yourself anymore, Mom. You're getting confused, Mom. Words designed to make me doubt my own mind, my own strength, my own worth. I began to question everything. Was I really becoming a burden? Were my memories really failing? Was my independence really dangerous? Their whispers followed me through my apartment like ghosts, making me second-guess every decision, every thought, every feeling. The money I had saved through decades of careful investments, the portfolio worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, the cryptocurrency that had grown beyond my wildest dreams, none of it mattered if I was losing my mind. Or so they wanted me to believe. They spoke in hushed tones about my assets and my estate when they thought I couldn't hear. But I wasn't deaf. And I wasn't stupid. I started hiding my financial statements in a shoebox under my bed. Not because I was paranoid, but because something deep in my gut told me that my money was more interesting to them than my well-being. The woman who had taught them the value of hard work was watching them scheme to take the fruits of her labor. Birthdays sneaked past unnoticed. My 73rd came and went without a phone call. I bought myself a small cake from the bakery down the street and ate it alone, the single candle reflecting in the dark window like a prayer no one heard. I was once the family's cornerstone, now, I was a ghost haunting the edges of their busy lives. When I caught a cold last winter, no one checked in. My coughing nights were silent battles against loneliness. I lay in my bed, listening to the neighbor's television through the thin walls, surrounded by the tissues and empty soup cans that marked my solitary recovery. The woman who had nursed others back to health for decades was healing alone, forgotten by the very people she had sacrificed everything to raise. The pharmacy visits became my social outings. The grocery store clerk knew me better than my own children. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would wave from her window, and that small gesture felt like a lifeline in an ocean of indifference. She was the only one who noticed when I lost weight, when my steps became slower, when my smile started to fade. One day in March, I found a letter tucked beneath my stack of mail. The return address was from Sunset Manor, a nursing home in Bayside. My heart began to pound as I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was an application for residential care, partially filled out in my daughter's neat handwriting. My name, my birth date, my medical information. All written in her hand, as if I were already too incompetent to speak for myself. The room spun around me. My legs gave out, and I sank to the kitchen floor, the letter fluttering down beside me like a confession of betrayal. My mother's antique teacup, the one with tiny roses that I had treasured for 40 years, slipped from the counter and shattered against the linoleum. The pieces scattered like my breaking heart, sharp fragments of a life I thought I controlled. Tears traced silent rivers down my cheeks as I sat among the broken porcelain and devastating revelation. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. The daughter I had carried for 9 months, the child I had nursed through fever and nightmares, the woman I had supported through divorce and hardship, she was planning to lock me away like a problem to be solved. But there was more in that envelope. Financial forms requesting information about my bank accounts, my investments, my assets. They wanted to know about every dollar, every stock, every piece of the fortune I had built through decades of saving. The nursing home cost $8,000 a month. $8,000 of my money to pay for my own imprisonment. A part of me whispered, "Say no." The voice was small at first, barely audible over the sound of my sobs. But it grew stronger as I sat on that cold floor, surrounded by the fragments of my old life. Say no. Fight back. You are not dead yet. Yet fear not at that small voice of rebellion. If I said no, would they abandon me completely? Would I lose them forever? Was being forgotten better than being imprisoned? The questions circled my mind like vultures, picking at my resolve until exhaustion took over. I spent that night boxing away the yellowed photos of happier times. Pictures of family vacations to the Hamptons, birthday parties in our old Brooklyn apartment, graduations and weddings where love still felt real. Each photo went into the box like a small funeral, a burial of the illusions that had sustained me. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning, staring at a woman quietly fading under the weight of betrayal. My reflection showed tired eyes, gray hair that needed styling, wrinkles that mapped 7 decades of living. But behind those tired eyes, something was stirring. Something that refused to go quietly into that sterile facility where my voice would be lost among the medicated silence. The next morning, I called Sarah. My voice shook as I confronted her about the application. "Mom, you don't understand," she said, her tone sharp with irritation. "We found that paperwork in your kitchen. You filled it out yourself and forgot about it." The lie hit me like a physical blow. I knew my own handwriting. I knew my own mind. I knew the difference between my careful cursive and her bold print. But she was counting on me to doubt myself, to accept her version of reality because it was easier than admitting she was planning my betrayal. "I never filled out any application, Sarah. See? This is exactly what we're talking about. Your memory isn't what it used to be, Mom. We're trying to help you." Help. The word tasted like poison in my mouth. This wasn't help. This was theft. Theft of my freedom, my dignity, my right to choose my own future. And they were using my love against me, weaponizing my maternal instincts to make me comply with their plans. The confrontation was a storm that had been building for months. Sarah arrived at my apartment with my son Michael, presenting a united front of concerned children who knew what was best for dear old Mom. Their faces wore masks of worry, but their eyes calculated the value of my cooperation. "You can't live alone anymore," Sarah announced, settling onto my couch like she owned it. "What if you fall? What if you forget to turn off the stove? What if something happens and no one finds you for days? What if you mind your own business?" I wanted to say. Instead, I asked quietly, "What if I don't want to go?" Michael's face flushed with anger that revealed his true feelings. "You don't understand. We're trying to help you. Do you want us to worry about you every single day? Do you want us to feel guilty when something terrible happens?" Their worry was about themselves, not me. Their guilt was about responsibility, not love. They wanted to solve the problem of my aging by hiding me away where I couldn't inconvenience their busy lives. But their words tasted like betrayal, seasoned with years of taking my sacrifices for granted. My son's reply was cold when I tried to explain my feelings. "You're making this about you again, Mom. This has to stop." Making it about me? My own life was supposed to be about me. My own future was supposed to be my choice. But somewhere along the way, I had become a supporting character in their stories, existing only to serve their needs and solve their problems. My late husband's ghost seemed to linger in the corners of the room during that confrontation. He would have fought for me. He would have told them exactly what they could do with their nursing home plans. But he wasn't here, and I was facing this battle alone. Even my 16-year-old granddaughter Emma, who used to call me every week, looked away when I tried to catch her eye. They had poisoned her against me too, convinced her that Grandma was losing her mind and needed professional care. The child who once held my hand while I taught her to knit now saw me as a burden to be managed. Each reaction from my family deepened the ache in my chest. Denial from Sarah, who insisted she was acting out of love. Manipulation from Michael, who used guilt and fear to batter down my resistance. Emotional blackmail from both of them, threatening to cut me out of their lives if I didn't cooperate. But amidst the chaos and cruelty, there was Mrs. Rodriguez. Maria had lived next door for 3 years, and we had developed the kind of friendship that blooms between women who understand loss. She had buried her own mother the year before, and she recognized the signs of family manipulation that I was too close to see. After Sarah and Michael stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard that my framed certificates rattled on the wall, Maria knocked softly. She found me crying at my kitchen table, the nursing home brochure crumpled in my fist. "They want to put me away, Maria," I whispered through my tears. "They want me to disappear." Maria, a fiery woman from the Bronx who had raised 5 children as a single mother, took my wrinkled hands in hers. Her grip was firm and warm, anchoring me to reality when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. "Listen to me, Rosa," she said, her voice fierce with protective love. "You deserve respect, but don't you dare settle for less." I watched my mother wither away in one of those places, and it wasn't because she needed care. It was because my brothers wanted her house and her pension without the inconvenience of her presence. Her words planted a seed of courage in the barren soil of my despair. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't being dramatic. Maybe I was being manipulated by people who should have protected me instead of plotting against me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I researched. I looked up my rights as a senior citizen. I read about financial abuse of elderly parents. I learned about the signs of family manipulation. Every article felt like a mirror reflecting my own experience back to me. But the most important thing I did was look up my own financial information. My investment portfolio had grown to over $400,000. My Bitcoin holdings, which my husband had insisted were worth keeping despite my skepticism, were now worth nearly $200,000. My savings account held another $100,000 from years of careful budgeting. $700,000. That's what my lifetime of work and saving had produced. That's what they wanted to control. That's what they were willing to imprison me to access. The first step toward liberation was terrifying and sweet at the same time. When Sarah called the next morning, demanding that I sign the nursing home admission papers, I took a deep breath and said the word that had been trapped in my throat for years. No. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then came the explosion of anger, threats, and manipulation that I had been afraid of my entire life. But as I listened to her rage, something unexpected happened. I felt calm. I felt strong. I felt like myself for the first time in years. "No, Sarah. I will not sign those papers. I will not give you power of attorney over my finances. I will not allow you to make decisions about my life without consulting me. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you need to think about what kind of daughter you want to be." I hung up the phone before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but they were shaking with adrenaline, not fear. I had said no. I had stood up for myself. I had chosen my own dignity over their comfort. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since my husband died. I unlocked my bedroom window and climbed carefully onto the fire escape. The metal was cold under my hands, but the Manhattan air filled my lungs with possibility. 7 stories below, the city hummed with life and energy and hope. I sat on that fire escape for an hour, watching the sun set over Queens, listening to the sounds of families eating dinner, children playing, life continuing in all its messy glory. For the first time in months, I felt connected to the world beyond my apartment walls. That night, I slept deeply and peacefully in my own bed. No nightmares about nursing homes. No anxiety about disappointing my children. No guilt about wanting to live my own life. Just deep, restorative sleep in the place I had chosen to call home. The next morning, I took the subway to Elmhurst and met with a legal aid worker who specialized in elder care. Janet was a woman about my daughter's age, but she listened to my story with the respect and attention that I craved from my own family. "You have rights, Rosa," she told me, spreading pamphlets across her desk like a roadmap to freedom. "No one can force you into a care facility against your will unless a court declares you incompetent. And from our conversation today, you are clearly capable of making your own decisions." She helped me understand the difference between love and control, between caring and manipulation. She gave me resources for therapy, support groups, and legal protection. Most importantly, she helped me realize that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I started therapy sessions at the local community center with Dr. Patricia Williams, a gentle woman who specialized in family dynamics and elder abuse. Yes, abuse. That was the word she used to describe what was happening to me. Financial abuse. Emotional abuse. Psychological manipulation designed to make me compliant and convenient. The therapy sessions were like surgery on my soul, cutting away years of guilt and conditioning that had made me believe my needs didn't matter. Dr. Williams helped me understand that loving my children didn't require sacrificing my autonomy, and that their love for me should never depend on my compliance with their demands. "You spent decades raising them to be independent adults," she reminded me during one session. "Now it's time for you to reclaim your own independence." Each week, I felt stronger. Each session revealed another layer of manipulation that I had accepted as normal family dynamics. I began to see the difference between healthy concern and controlling behavior. I started to trust my own perceptions again. But the real test came 3 weeks after my first "no," when my family gathered in my cramped Queens apartment for what they called an intervention. Sarah, Michael, my daughter-in-law Jennifer, and even my granddaughter Emma came to present their case for why I needed professional care. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. They had prepared speeches, printed articles about senior safety, and brought emotional ammunition designed to wear down my resistance. But I was no longer the woman who crumbled under their pressure. Sarah held up a framed family photo from Emma's high school graduation, the one where we all looked happy and connected. "Look at this, Mom. Look at how much we love you. We're doing this because we care." But instead of melting under the weight of manufactured nostalgia, I did something that shocked all of us. I took the photo from her hands and tore it in half. The pieces fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves, carrying with them the illusion that their love was unconditional. "Love doesn't threaten," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't steal someone's freedom and call it care." The room erupted in protest. Michael accused me of being dramatic. Jennifer muttered about ungrateful mothers. Emma started crying, not understanding why her grandmother was destroying family memories. But I stood firm in the eye of their storm, protected by months of therapy and self-reflection. I will no longer buy love with compliance. I will no longer sacrifice my dignity for your comfort. Respect me or lose me, but you will not control me. They tried everything. Guilt about how much they worried. Threats about what would happen if I got hurt. Financial pressure about the cost of my independence. But each manipulation attempt bounced off the armor I had built from self-respect and professional support. Sarah played her final card. "Fine, Mom. If you want to be stubborn and selfish, that's your choice. But don't expect us to enable your delusions. Don't expect us to come running when you need help. Don't expect us to pretend everything is okay when you're clearly losing your mind." The threat that once would have sent me begging for forgiveness now felt like a liberation. "I expect you to treat me like a human being with rights and feelings," I replied. "And if you can't do that, then maybe some distance will help you remember who raised you to be better than this." After they left, slamming doors and throwing accusations like weapons, I walked to my bedroom and opened the safe where I kept my important documents and emergency cash. I had never changed the combination, foolishly trusting my family with access to my most private information. But that day, I changed the combination to my birthday, my actual birthday, not the date they remembered to call me once a year if I was lucky. I locked away my financial statements, my will, my passwords, and my peace of mind. Some battles had to be fought with boundaries, not weapons. The silence that followed their departure was different from the lonely quiet I had lived with for months. This silence was peaceful, chosen, mine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my favorite chair, watching the city lights twinkle like stars beyond my window. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. I had stood up to bullies who happened to share my DNA. I had chosen my own well-being over their convenience. I had remembered that the woman who had survived 37 years in New York hospitals was strong enough to survive family manipulation. But as I should have expected from people who had spent years treating me like a problem to be solved, they weren't finished with me yet. Just when I thought the turbulent river of family drama had finally calmed, the second wave crashed over me with devastating force. 3 days after our confrontation, Maria knocked on my door with her phone in her hand and fury in her eyes. "Rosa, you need to see this," she said, handing me the phone with a Facebook post displayed on the screen. My daughter had written a public message that made my blood run cold. Please keep my mother in your prayers. She's been showing signs of dementia and paranoid delusions, refusing the medical care she desperately needs. It breaks my heart to see someone I love slipping away from reality. If you see her around the neighborhood acting confused or lost, please call me immediately. She's dangerous to herself and potentially others. The post had dozens of comments expressing sympathy for Sarah's burden of caring for a mentally ill mother. Neighbors I had known for years were offering to keep an eye on the poor confused woman in apartment 7B. My reputation, built over decades of community involvement, was being systematically destroyed by lies designed to make me appear incompetent. My hands shook as I read comment after comment from people who believed they were being helpful. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store wrote about noticing my odd behavior lately. The mailman mentioned that I seemed more agitated than usual. Even Dr. Peterson, my physician for 20 years, had been contacted about my concerning symptoms. But the cruelest part was the follow-up post that appeared an hour later. Update: my mother has been hiding her financial confusion from us. We've discovered unpaid bills, erratic spending, and evidence that she may have been the victim of scams. We're working with Adult Protective Services to ensure her safety. Please respect our family's privacy during this difficult time. Every word was a lie wrapped in concern. Every sentence was designed to destroy my credibility and justify their control over my life and my money. They were creating a public narrative that would make forced institutionalization appear necessary and compassionate. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. This wasn't just about controlling my living situation anymore. This was character assassination, reputation murder, public humiliation designed to make me so ashamed that I would surrender without further resistance. Maria's face was purple with rage as she read over my shoulder. This is evil, Rosa. This is what abusers do when they can't get their way. They destroy their victims' credibility so no one will believe them when they cry for help. But as I stared at the phone screen, reading lie after lie about my mental state and financial competence, something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling under the weight of public embarrassment, I felt a cold, clean anger settle into my bones. They had underestimated me. They thought that 7 decades of living had made me fragile and afraid. They believed that a woman who had survived the death of her husband, decades of hospital stress, and years of their emotional manipulation would fold under the pressure of gossip and lies. They were wrong. A fake apology arrived in my mailbox 2 days later. Sarah's handwriting on expensive stationery, words that dripped with more venom than remorse. Dear Mom, I'm sorry if my social media posts upset you. I only shared my concerns because I love you and want you to get help. Perhaps we can find a compromise that keeps you safe while respecting your wishes. Please call me so we can work this out like a family. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. She was sorry if I was upset, not sorry for lying about me publicly. She wanted to work this out like a family, the same family that had spent months plotting my imprisonment. She offered compromise while continuing to insist that my safety required their control. But for the first time in this entire nightmare, I met their betrayal with something they hadn't expected: silence. No tears, no desperate phone calls begging them to understand. No frantic attempts to prove my competence to skeptical neighbors. Just an unshakable calm that came from finally understanding who they really were. I had spent months doubting my own perceptions, wondering if I was being paranoid or unreasonable. But their public lies had revealed the truth more clearly than any therapy session ever could. They were willing to destroy my reputation to access my assets. They were willing to humiliate me to control me. I had become someone who knew her worth. They could twist facts, spread lies, and manipulate public opinion, but my spirit had been rebuilt from shards of pain and courage. I was no longer the woman who needed their approval to validate her existence. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 3 letters. The first was to my attorney, documenting the harassment and requesting a restraining order if necessary. The second was to my physician, requesting a complete cognitive evaluation to medically disprove their claims of dementia. The third was to my financial advisor, changing all my passwords and restricting access to my accounts. But the most important thing I did was call Dr. Williams for an emergency therapy session. I needed professional perspective on this latest assault on my dignity and independence. This is escalation, Rosa, she explained during our phone session. When abusers lose control through normal manipulation, they often resort to public humiliation and character assassination. They're hoping to isolate you from potential supporters and make you feel so ashamed that you'll comply with their demands. Her words helped me understand that their tactics were predictable, textbook emotional abuse designed to break my will. But I was no longer breakable. I was no longer the woman who absorbed their poison and called it love. 2 months after that storm of lies and manipulation, I found myself walking through Central Park under autumn's golden light. The leaves crunched beneath my feet like the remnants of my old life, beautiful in their death, making space for new growth. I was visiting old friends from my nursing days, women who had known me for decades and never doubted my competence or sanity. Linda, my former charge nurse at Mount Sinai, laughed with tears in her eyes when I told her about my family's nursing home plans. "Rosa, you were the sharpest nurse I ever worked with," she said, squeezing my hand over coffee in a cafe near the hospital. "You saved more lives than any of us could count. The idea that you need custodial care is ridiculous." These women remembered who I was before I became defined by my family's needs. They saw the professional competence, the quick thinking, the strength that had carried me through decades of medical emergencies. In their eyes, I wasn't a burden or a problem, I was a hero who had dedicated her life to healing others. I joined a painting class in a Chelsea studio, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for when I was busy serving everyone else's dreams. My first attempt was terrible, a lopsided landscape that looked like a child's finger painting. But it was mine. I had chosen the colors, guided the brush, created something beautiful from nothing. The instructor, a patient woman named Claire who was about Emma's age, praised my bold use of color and encouraged my artistic exploration. She didn't see a confused old woman losing her mind. She saw a beginning artist discovering her creative voice. I threw out the faded dresses that made me look like someone's neglected grandmother and bought new coats that wrapped me in comfort and style. Bright blues and deep purples that reflected my personality instead of hiding it. Comfortable shoes that could carry me on adventures instead of keeping me safely sedentary. The woman in the mirror was transforming. The tired eyes now sparkled with fierce pride. The slouched shoulders stood straight with recovered dignity. The hesitant voice now spoke with authority earned through 7 decades of survival. Maria and I shared cups of jasmine tea on my balcony overlooking the city skyline, planning trips we wanted to take and dreams we wanted to pursue. She was learning to paint too, and we critiqued each other's work with the gentle honesty of true friendship. "You look different, Rosa," she observed one afternoon as we watched the sun set over Manhattan. "You look like yourself again." She was right. I had returned to myself after months of trying to be the person my family wanted me to be. The woman who had escaped their manipulation wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, growing, becoming whole again. My financial advisor helped me set up a trust that would protect my assets from family manipulation while ensuring my long-term care needs were met. I updated my will, removing Sarah and Michael as beneficiaries and instead designating scholarships for nursing students who couldn't afford their education. If my children wanted my money more than my company, they could watch it help strangers who would appreciate the gift. My wealth would honor my profession and my values, not reward manipulation and emotional abuse. Every evening, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the city pulse with life and energy. I read books I hadn't had time for when I was busy managing everyone else's crises. I listened to music that made me remember my younger self. I planned trips to places I had always wanted to see. The phone rang occasionally, Sarah or Michael trying new approaches to break down my resistance. Sometimes guilt, sometimes anger, sometimes false sweetness designed to lure me back into their web of control. But I had learned to recognize manipulation for what it was, and I let their calls go to voicemail. Their messages grew increasingly desperate as they realized I wasn't coming back to my role as their personal ATM and emotional dumping ground. They threatened to contest my mental competence in court, not knowing that I had already been evaluated by Dr. Peterson and declared cognitively sound. They threatened to cut me off from my granddaughter, not understanding that a relationship built on emotional blackmail wasn't worth preserving. But their threats had lost their power over me. I had faced my worst fear, losing my family, and discovered that being alone with dignity was infinitely better than being surrounded by people who saw me as a resource to be exploited. It's been almost a year since the day my daughter tried to imprison me in that nursing home. As I sit here now, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars, I can barely remember the woman who used to beg for crumbs of affection from people who should have loved her unconditionally. The past feels like a sunset faded beyond the horizon, not a loss but a liberation, a necessary death that made room for rebirth. Every crack in those family photos, every harsh word that revealed their true feelings, every manipulation that failed to break my spirit became a stepping stone toward self-respect. I received a Christmas card from Emma last month. Just a simple note saying she missed me and hoped I was happy. No demands for money, no guilt about my choices, just genuine affection from a young woman who was starting to understand the difference between love and control. Maybe someday, when she's older and has experienced her own struggles with manipulation, we'll have a relationship built on mutual respect instead of family obligation. Maybe not. Either way, I wish her well and hope she learns to value herself as much as I've learned to value myself. I raise a glass of Pinot Noir in my quiet apartment, a toast to survival, to strength, and to the love that must come with respect. The woman who was afraid to say no has learned to say yes to herself. The woman who bought affection with compliance has learned that real love doesn't have a price tag. My investments continue to grow, my art continues to improve, and my spirit continues to soar. I'm planning a trip to Italy in the spring, something I always wanted to do but never thought I deserved. Now I know I deserve every sunset, every adventure, every moment of joy I can create. The nursing home brochures went into the trash months ago, replaced by travel magazines and art supply catalogs. The life they planned for me, medicated compliance and institutional beige, has been replaced by vibrant possibility stretching toward every horizon. I am 73 years old, and I am finally free. But freedom, I've learned, isn't just about saying no to what's wrong. It's about saying yes to what's right, what's healing, what honors the woman you've fought to become. In the months that followed my Declaration of Independence, I discovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath decades of service to others. The community center became my second home. Not just for Dr. Williams' therapy sessions, but for the senior advocacy group that met every Thursday afternoon. These were women and men who had faced similar battles with family members who mistook control for care. We shared stories, strategies, and most importantly, solidarity. Margaret, an 80-year-old former teacher, had escaped a son who wanted to sell her house and move her into his basement. He kept saying it was for my own good, she told us with bitter laughter. What was good for him was free babysitting and access to my Social Security check. James, a 75-year-old retired mechanic, had fought off 3 daughters who wanted to declare him incompetent after he refused to give them money for business ventures. They said I was too old to understand investments, he shared. The same man who built a successful auto shop from nothing was apparently too confused to manage his own checkbook. These stories weren't unique. They weren't rare. They were epidemic, a hidden crisis of elder abuse disguised as family concern. Listening to others made me understand that my experience wasn't a personal failure. It was a systematic problem that preyed on older adults who had spent their lives putting others first. But it also showed me something else: resistance was possible. Dignity was worth fighting for. And sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. The advocacy group became my chosen family. We celebrated each other's victories, supported each other through setbacks, and created the kind of unconditional acceptance that should exist in biological families but often doesn't. When Margaret got a restraining order against her son, we took her out for champagne. When James successfully defended his competency in court, we threw him a victory party. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other seniors navigate family manipulation and financial abuse. My nursing background gave me credibility with doctors who needed to document cognitive evaluations. My personal experience gave me empathy with victims who thought they were losing their minds. The work was heartbreaking and healing at the same time. I met so many women like myself, intelligent, capable, financially stable adults whose own children were systematically undermining their confidence and autonomy. The patterns were identical: isolation, gaslighting, financial pressure, threats of abandonment, public humiliation. But I also saw transformation. I watched 70-year-old women rediscover their voices. I saw 80-year-old men learn to set boundaries with adult children who had treated them like piggy banks. I witnessed the resurrection of spirits that had been crushed by family betrayal. One case particularly haunted me. Dorothy, a 78-year-old widow, came to the clinic with bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes. Her daughter-in-law had been stealing money from her checking account while her son looked the other way. When Dorothy threatened to call the police, they told her she was getting senile and paranoid. She said if I made trouble, they'd have me committed, Dorothy whispered, her voice barely audible. She said no one would believe a crazy old woman over a concerned family. I saw myself in her frightened eyes. I remembered the weight of that nursing home application, the crushing fear of losing control over my own existence. But I also saw something Dorothy couldn't see yet: the strength that would carry her through to the other side. Working with Dorothy, I realized that my own healing was still incomplete. I had learned to protect myself, but I hadn't fully processed the grief of losing my children to their own greed and selfishness. Dr. Williams helped me understand that mourning the family I thought I had was a necessary part of accepting the family I actually had. The grief hit me in waves during the spring months. I would see mothers and daughters shopping together in the market and feel a sharp pang of loss. I would hear grandmothers talking about their grandchildren's accomplishments and remember the loneliness of birthdays spent alone. But alongside the grief came something unexpected: relief. I no longer had to perform gratitude for crumbs of attention. I no longer had to pretend that financial manipulation was love. I no longer had to accept emotional abuse as the price of family connection. The relief felt like taking off shoes that had been too tight for years. Every step was easier, lighter, less painful. I had been carrying the weight of their expectations and demands without realizing how heavy the burden had become. Spring brought the Italy trip I had promised myself. I spent 3 weeks in Tuscany, staying in small hotels, painting watercolors of vineyards, eating pasta and drinking wine without having to justify the expense to anyone. I was traveling alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was traveling free. In a small cafe in Florence, I met another older woman traveling solo. Catherine was from Toronto, recently widowed, exploring Europe for the first time at age 71. Over cappuccino and pastries, we shared our stories of late-blooming independence. My kids thought I was having a breakdown, she laughed, showing me photos from her phone. They couldn't understand why I wanted to travel instead of babysitting their children for free. They kept saying I was being selfish. Selfish, I repeated, tasting the familiar accusation. The word they use when we finally start living for ourselves. Catherine nodded knowingly. I told my daughter, I raised you to be independent. Now let me be independent too. She wasn't happy, but she's starting to understand. That conversation in the Italian sunshine helped me see that my experience wasn't unique to my family's dysfunction. Cultural expectations about aging parents and dutiful children created pressure that could warp even healthy relationships. The difference was that some families worked through the tension with respect and communication, while others resorted to manipulation and control. I returned from Italy with a deeper understanding of my own worth and a clearer vision of the life I wanted to build. The apartment that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. The silence that had once been filled with loneliness now held peace and possibility. I dedicated one room to my art, setting up an easel by the window overlooking the city. My paintings improved with practice and patience. The awkward landscapes became confident cityscapes. The hesitant brushstrokes became bold expressions of color and emotion. Maria often joined me for painting sessions, and we created a small gallery wall in my living room featuring our best work. Visitors to my apartment, friends from the community center, fellow volunteers from the legal clinic, always commented on the vibrant paintings that had replaced the dusty family photos. You can see the joy in these colors, one friend observed. They practically glow with happiness. She was right. The paintings reflected the gradual brightening of my inner landscape. The dark, muted tones of my early grief had given way to brilliant blues and warm golds that celebrated my hard-won freedom. But the most important change wasn't in my art or my living space, it was in my relationship with myself. I had learned to treat myself with the kindness I had always shown to others. I bought myself flowers for no reason. I cooked elaborate meals just for me. I wore my nicest jewelry to run errands because I deserved beauty in ordinary moments. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space now claimed her right to exist fully and joyfully. The woman who had once begged for approval now offered approval to herself. The woman who had once feared abandonment now embraced solitude as a gift. This transformation wasn't always linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, nights when the silence felt too empty and I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But each morning brought renewed strength, fresh clarity, deeper self-acceptance. Dr. Williams helped me understand that healing from family trauma was a process, not an event. You're not trying to get back to who you were before, she explained. You're becoming who you were meant to be all along. That wisdom sustained me through the difficult moments when grief and relief tangled together in confusing knots. I was mourning the loss of my children while celebrating my liberation from their control. I was grieving the family I had wanted while embracing the family I had chosen. The legal clinic work expanded my understanding of elder abuse beyond my own experience. I learned about the elderly man whose nephew had forged his signature on property transfers. I met the woman whose daughter had opened credit cards in her name and run up thousands in debt. I worked with seniors who had been physically intimidated, emotionally blackmailed, and financially exploited by people who claimed to love them. Each case reinforced my decision to fight for my independence. Each victory in court or successful intervention strengthened my belief that aging parents deserved respect, not control. Each grateful client who reclaimed their autonomy reminded me that my own struggle had been worth it. One particularly rewarding case involved helping a 74-year-old man named Robert whose 3 sons had been pressuring him to sell his house and move into assisted living so they could inherit his property sooner. Robert was physically healthy, mentally sharp, and perfectly capable of living independently, but his sons had launched a campaign of fear designed to make him doubt his own capabilities. Working with Robert, I recognized the same tactics my own children had used: constant worry about my safety, exaggerated concerns about my memory, predictions of disaster if I continued living alone. But I also saw how different families could be when love was genuine rather than manipulative. Robert's youngest son, David, broke ranks with his brothers and supported his father's right to make his own decisions. "Dad raised us to be independent," David told me during a family conference. "I'm not going to repay that gift by stealing his independence now." That moment highlighted what was missing in my own family: a voice of reason, a family member who prioritized my well-being over their own convenience. It made me sad for what I had lost, but also grateful for what I had found, a community of people who valued my autonomy because they understood its importance. The community center started a support group specifically for seniors dealing with family manipulation, and I became one of the group leaders. The first meeting drew 8 people. Within 6 months, we regularly had 25 attendees. The need was greater than anyone had realized. Leading support groups taught me that my story had power beyond my own healing. When I shared my experience with nursing home manipulation, others recognized their own situations more clearly. When I talked about setting financial boundaries, group members found the courage to protect their assets. When I described the process of choosing dignity over false family harmony, others saw a path forward. But the most healing aspect of the support group was witnessing other people's transformations. I watched shy, frightened older adults rediscover their voices and assert their rights. I saw confused, self-doubting parents learn to trust their own perceptions again. I witnessed the gradual rebuilding of self-worth that had been systematically destroyed by family manipulation. One group member, a soft-spoken woman named Ruth, had been controlled by her daughter for years through threats of being cut off from her grandchildren. Ruth had given her daughter thousands of dollars she couldn't afford, co-signed loans that damaged her credit, and endured constant criticism about her housekeeping and health. Over several months of group meetings, Ruth began to see the manipulation for what it was. She started setting small boundaries, refusing to lend money, declining to babysit on demand, speaking up when her daughter's criticism became abusive. Each small victory built her confidence for larger acts of self-advocacy. The breakthrough came when Ruth's daughter demanded that she co-sign a car loan and threatened to move the grandchildren out of state if Ruth refused. Instead of caving to the familiar threat, Ruth called her daughter's bluff. "If you move to punish me for protecting my financial security," Ruth said calmly, "that will show your children the kind of person you really are. I raised you better than this, but I can't make you be better than this." Ruth's daughter backed down. The threat of losing her mother's financial support was more powerful than the threat of taking away visitation with grandchildren. The manipulation only worked when Ruth believed it would work. Watching Ruth reclaim her power reminded me of my own journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Each person who escaped family manipulation proved that dignity was possible, that aging didn't require surrendering autonomy, that love should enhance freedom rather than restrict it. The advocacy work also brought unexpected friendships. Janet, the legal aid attorney who had first helped me, became a close friend and collaborator. We often met for lunch to discuss difficult cases and share strategies for helping clients navigate family conflicts. "You have a gift for this," Janet told me one afternoon as we reviewed notes from a particularly challenging intervention. "You understand what they're going through in a way that I can only learn from books and training. Your experience gives you credibility that can't be taught." Her words helped me understand that my painful journey had prepared me for purposeful work. The skills I had developed surviving my own family's manipulation, recognizing gaslighting, setting boundaries, protecting assets, finding professional support, were exactly what other victims needed to learn. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children's attempts to control me had taught me how to help others escape control. Their manipulation had educated me about manipulation. Their betrayal had prepared me to recognize and prevent other betrayals. In a strange way, I felt grateful for the clarity their cruelty had provided. A kinder daughter might have manipulated me more subtly, keeping me trapped in confusion and self-doubt for years longer. Sarah's harsh tactics had shocked me into awareness and action that ultimately saved my life. Summer arrived with its familiar heat and energy, but this year I experienced it differently. Instead of sitting alone in my air-conditioned apartment, I spent time in parks and outdoor cafes, traveling to museums and cultural events I had always wanted to attend but never felt I deserved. I took a writing class at the local college, something I had dreamed of doing since high school but never had time for during my working years. The instructor, a published novelist named Frank, encouraged us to write about our most transformative experiences. My first essay was about the day I found the nursing home application in my mail. Writing about that moment of betrayal and the journey that followed helped me process emotions I hadn't fully examined. The act of shaping my experience into narrative gave it meaning beyond my personal pain. Frank praised my authentic voice and compelling story arc, encouraging me to consider expanding the essay into a longer work. "This is a story that needs to be told," he said. "There are thousands of people living what you lived, feeling as isolated and crazy as you felt. Your experience could be a lifeline." That conversation planted a seed that grew into a larger project. I began interviewing other support group members, documenting their stories of family manipulation and eventual liberation. Each person I spoke with added another layer to my understanding of elder abuse and recovery. The writing project became a collaboration with the legal clinic. We were creating a resource guide for seniors facing family manipulation, part memoir, part educational material, part practical handbook for survival and recovery. The goal was to help other people recognize manipulation earlier and respond more effectively than I had. Working on the writing project forced me to revisit some of my darkest moments, but it also highlighted my growth and resilience. The woman who had once sat crying on her kitchen floor, surrounded by broken porcelain and devastating betrayal, had become someone who could help others navigate similar crises. The interviews revealed common patterns in family manipulation that transcended individual circumstances. Almost everyone described years of gradual boundary erosion before the major crisis hit. Most had experienced gaslighting designed to make them doubt their own perceptions. All had been told that resistance to family control was selfish, ungrateful, or evidence of mental decline. But the interviews also revealed the diversity of recovery paths. Some people reconciled with family members after setting firm boundaries. Others, like me, chose permanent distance from relatives who couldn't accept their autonomy. A few found middle ground through family therapy and supervised contact. The key factor in successful recovery wasn't the specific approach chosen, it was the reclamation of the right to choose. People healed when they stopped asking for permission to live their own lives and started granting themselves the authority to make their own decisions. As autumn approached, marking a full year since my transformation began, I reflected on the profound changes in my daily existence. The apartment that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with purposeful activity. The phone that had once brought anxiety now connected me with friends and meaningful work. The mirror that had once reflected defeat now showed strength, dignity, and quiet joy. I had built a life that honored my values instead of serving other people's convenience. I had created relationships based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. I had discovered that love multiplies when it's shared freely rather than extracted through manipulation. The approaching anniversary of my liberation felt like a milestone worth celebrating. I planned a small party with my chosen family, Maria, Dr. Williams, Janet from the legal clinic, friends from the support group and writing class, colleagues from the advocacy work. But first, I wanted to visit the place where my journey toward freedom had begun, the cemetery where my husband was buried. I hadn't been there since the early days of my grief, when talking to his gravestone had felt necessary but painful. Now, approaching his grave with flowers from my own garden and strength earned through struggle, I felt ready for a different kind of conversation. "Hello, my love," I whispered, settling onto the stone bench nearby. "I have so much to tell you." I talked to him about the betrayal, the manipulation, the gradual erosion of my confidence and autonomy. I told him about finding the nursing home application, about the lies Sarah had spread on social media, about the months of therapy and legal battles and painful growth. "You would have been so angry," I said, remembering his fierce protectiveness when we were young. "You would have told them exactly what you thought of their schemes." But I also told him about the woman I had become in his absence, stronger, more independent, less willing to accept disrespect as the price of family connection. I described my art, my advocacy work, my circle of true friends who valued my well-being over my wealth. "I think you would be proud," I said finally, placing the flowers on his grave. "I think you would say I finally learned to fight for myself the way I always fought for others." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for a moment I felt his presence so strongly it took my breath away. Not the bitter ghost of unfinished business, but the loving spirit of someone who wanted me to live fully and freely. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The conversation at his grave had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I was no longer the grieving widow trying to earn love through compliance, or the confused mother doubting her own perceptions, or the frightened woman facing forced institutionalization. I was Rosa, artist, advocate, survivor, and at 73 years old, still becoming who I was meant to be. The anniversary party exceeded my expectations. 23 people gathered in my transformed apartment to celebrate not just my personal victory, but the possibility of recovery that my story represented. We shared food, laughter, and hope with the easy intimacy of people who had chosen each other as family. Margaret from the support group made a toast that brought tears to my eyes, to Rosa, who showed us that it's never too late to save yourself, and that sometimes the family we need is the family we create. Dr. Williams added her own words, to Rosa, who transformed her pain into purpose and her survival into service to others. "You've shown us that healing isn't just personal, it's political, social, and deeply necessary." As I looked around the room at faces filled with genuine affection and respect, I understood what I had gained by losing my biological family. These people valued my thoughts, respected my choices, and celebrated my independence. They saw my strength rather than my vulnerability, my potential rather than my limitations. The writing project had evolved into a book proposal that Janet was helping me pitch to publishers who specialized in memoirs about family dynamics and elder rights. Whether or not it got published, the process of documenting my experience and interviewing other survivors had been therapeutic and empowering. But the real measure of my recovery wasn't in external achievements or public recognition. It was in the quiet moments of daily life when I made choices based on my own preferences rather than other people's expectations. It was in my ability to enjoy solitude without feeling rejected, to set boundaries without feeling guilty, to live authentically without needing approval. I had learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between family obligation and genuine love, between caregiving and enabling. These distinctions had been blurred for most of my adult life, making me vulnerable to manipulation that disguised itself as concern. The work at the legal clinic continued to provide both purpose and perspective. Each case I helped with reinforced my understanding that family manipulation was epidemic, but so was the capacity for recovery. Every senior who successfully defended their independence proved that aging didn't require surrendering autonomy. One recent case involved helping an 81-year-old woman named Gloria whose son had been intercepting her mail and paying her bills in order to demonstrate her incompetence to social services. Gloria was sharp as a tack, but her son's interference was creating the appearance of financial chaos that he then used to justify seeking guardianship. Working with Gloria reminded me of my own experience with financial manipulation. The tactics were identical: create problems, then present control as the solution. Make the victim appear incompetent, then offer to manage their incompetence. Manufacture crisis, then position themselves as rescue. But it also reminded me how far I had come. 2 years ago, I might have doubted Gloria's version of events, wondering if such elaborate manipulation was really possible. Now I recognized the patterns immediately and knew exactly what documentation we needed to protect her rights. Gloria successfully retained her independence and her son faced criminal charges for mail theft and elder abuse. Her victory felt personal to me, proof that the work we were doing could prevent other families from destroying themselves through greed and moral weakness. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Queens in snow that transformed the familiar neighborhood into something magical and new. I watched the snowfall from my window, wrapped in a cashmere shawl I had bought myself for Christmas, sipping wine from glasses that caught the late afternoon light. The view from my window had remained the same, but my perspective on everything I saw had fundamentally changed. The small apartment that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. The quiet street that had once seemed lonely now seemed peaceful. The independence that had once terrified me now felt precious beyond measure. I thought about the woman who had sat in this same chair 2 years ago, waiting for a daughter who never showed up for lunch, doubting her own worth and accepting emotional crumbs as evidence of love. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone I remembered with compassion but could barely recognize as myself. The transformation hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, nights when the silence felt too empty and I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But each morning had brought renewed strength, clearer vision, deeper self-respect. I had learned that healing wasn't about fixing what was broken, it was about discovering what had always been whole. My family's manipulation had convinced me that I was damaged, incompetent, burdensome. Recovery meant recognizing that their perception of me was a reflection of their own moral limitations, not my inherent worth. The community I had built around myself proved that healthy relationships were possible. These friendships were based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection rather than obligation, manipulation, or financial dependency. The difference in how I felt after spending time with my chosen family versus my biological family was stark and revealing. With true friends, I felt energized, valued, inspired to be my best self. With my biological family, I had felt drained, diminished, reduced to my usefulness rather than celebrated for my humanity. The contrast helped me understand that love should be nourishing, not depleting. As I prepared for bed that snowy evening, I performed my nightly ritual of gratitude, not the desperate gratitude of someone trying to convince herself that crumbs were enough, but the deep appreciation of someone who had fought for and won the right to live authentically. I was grateful for Maria's friendship, for Dr. Williams' guidance, for Janet's legal expertise, for the support group members who had become my chosen family. I was grateful for my art, my advocacy work, my financial security, my independence. Most of all, I was grateful for the strength I had discovered within myself, strength that had been there all along but had been buried beneath decades of putting others first. The woman who had survived 37 years in New York hospitals, who had raised 2 children while working multiple jobs, who had navigated widowhood and financial planning and community involvement, that woman had always been capable of surviving family manipulation. The only thing that had changed was my willingness to use that capability on my own behalf. As I drifted off to sleep in my own bed, in my own home, surrounded by my own choices, I smiled at the journey that had brought me here. The path through betrayal and manipulation to dignity and freedom hadn't been one I would have chosen, but it had led me to a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had previously imagined possible. I was 74 years old, and I was still becoming. Have you ever lived through something like this, or known someone who has? Have you watched family members mistake control for love, or experienced the pain of being treated like a burden instead of a blessing? Please share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. If my journey touched your heart, or if you see yourself or someone you love in my story, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It will help me continue opening my heart and sharing these truths that so many of us carry in silence. Because every story deserves a voice, and every soul deserves the chance to be free.